Right, good evening, everyone. This is the Wednesday, December 10th, 2025 meeting of the Policy Committee. I'd like to welcome our new committee member, Mrs. McGranahan, to the team, and welcome back Mr. Jordan, Dr. Aberley, and our student representatives, Alec Ebb and Isabella McQuiggan. This evening, we have 4 policies to review with you. And I will begin with policy 105.2, exemption from instruction. And I'll be bouncing back and forth between the actual draft policy and some slides that I'll attach to the agenda, or Ms. Scholl will attach to the agenda following the meeting, as well as minutes, which will be provided within 48 hours of the meeting. So policy 105.2, exemption from instruction, is a policy that we have in effect. This allows families at this time to request to opt out of various forms of instruction. And we'll show you actually the current policy in just a few moments. But what happened most recently is that there were court actions that provided for the possibility of students who are age 18 and older to have those rights the same as their parents. And so you'll see here in the second bullet that with regard to opting out of instruction that is in conflict with someone's religious beliefs, we've always had the option for parents or guardians to request to opt out or to review instructional units. The new policy includes the option for students 18 and older to do the same for themselves. For example, let's say an 18-year-old student practiced a different religion than their parents. They might have a different set of beliefs and ask for a different kind of review of curriculum. There is also within the PSBA language some conversation about whether moral beliefs should be included in addition to religious beliefs. And so there are opt-out provisions to see whether or not the board would like to have full opt-out rights to both parents and students for moral and religious beliefs, or to hold students strictly to the religious opt-out provision. And you will find that in our review and conversation at the administration level, our thought is that we do want to recognize and value student voice, and so allow students 18 and older to opt out if they follow the criteria as they're presented. But we also feel that the term moral is too broad and vague, and so we'd like to focus on religious beliefs rather than religious and or moral beliefs. This is certainly up to the committee to decide, and that's why we wanted to bring it to you for conversation. You will see these options within the policy draft itself. The selection we've chosen is what's in yellow here. The rights granted by this policy are granted to parents and guardians of students enrolled in this district when the students are under the age of 18, and to the students themselves when the student is 18 or older. Now, one thing implied here is that if a student and a parent disagreed and the student were to be 18 or older, the student's perspective would take precedence. In addition to that, there is a section on delegation of responsibility. And the idea here is, how often should the district notify the community or parents or 18-year-olds of a changed policy? And historically, the district has provided this type of information annually in August. So as the school year is about to begin, we provide updates to policies that are relevant to students and families with regard to instruction and a variety of other areas. And so our thought is that annually is sufficient. There is an option to do it at the beginning of every unit, or at the and so we found some of the other options to be a little burdensome for our classroom teachers, and thought the annual notification, which is what we've used for a number of years, would be sufficient. And then there's an optional guidelines section where you could choose whether or not you wanted more frequent parental notifications, as I just mentioned, but there's also a section on exemption from dissection activities. And this is, again, is new because there were court cases in which students or families' deeply held religious beliefs around dissection of animals was considered not in line with their belief systems. And so you can exempt students from dissection activities as long as the teacher has provided notice at least 3 weeks prior to the start of whatever dissection activity we would have. Now, in Springfield, we've done a quick review of our science courses. We only have one course where dissection occurs, and that's in an elective called zoology. And we do believe that with regard to electives that a student does not have to take in order to graduate, but would be electing, we would include language in the curriculum guide to indicate that dissection is an essential component of a zoology course. And so that's something that Dr. Johnson would work with our science department on at the high school level. We do not have dissection in any other level in the district. And so this is the document that we currently use as our opt-out reference guide. So I thought I'd share this with you, and these slides, again, we'll make sure you all have this evening, but also we'll include them in the minutes for the meeting. But you can see here that Policy 105.2, exemption from instruction, is slightly different than Policy 105.1, review of instructional materials. But in either case, families have access to review materials to decide whether or not they're aligned to their religious beliefs. And if they are not and they want to be opted out, they have the right to do so. So we've had this practice in place. The primary difference is the consideration, the optional consideration of whether to add morality in addition to religious belief around opting out. And then second to that would be this option of allowing 18-year-olds to be able to opt out on their own. And so you can see here, Dr. Johnson created this document to be able to provide some clarity for our administrators when requests for opting out occur. And before I move to the actual draft policy, what questions do you have about this first policy that's under review? What questions or comments? Dr. Aberle.
Hello. I mean, I agree with the religious aspect and align with your interpretation around the moral piece. I think it's just very, very broad. I think that would present some challenges in how do you interpret it. With respect to the dissection piece, so is the thinking that if a student opts in to do the elective for zoology, they know ahead of time that it includes dissection and they should not sign up for that course?
That is the conversation that we've had preliminarily, because
Okay.
we feel that there's significant learning occurring in that activity. Now, in theory, students may be working in teams on a particular dissection. And so the conversation that will be had between the zoology teacher, the building principal, and the family, or in this, it could be the senior student if they're 18, would be, you know, what specifically are you objecting to about that particular activity?
Okay.
Yeah.
So because it's kind of split up into sections. So the dissection piece, because that's like very small at the end of the policy. I was unclear if a student can choose to opt out of it regardless of their age, or if a parent can request a student opt out if they're under the age of 18.
Right. It's a great question. So students under the age of 18 do not have, under this policy guidance, opt-out options. Their parents must take responsibility until they turn 18.
So regardless whether it's the religious piece or the dissection piece?
That's correct.
Okay.
So parents would need to participate in that decision. In an ideal scenario, when students are 18 or older, they and their parents would be able to collaborate on that position. But ultimately, we would be allowing the students, when they become legal adults, to make that call for themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Mrs. McGranahan, I think your hand was next, and then I'll just work right down the line. Okay.
Thank you. So I was just curious if you had any information about how frequently this policy is being used. How often are people opting out of things?
Sure. It's a great question. In general, I would say infrequently. Dr. Johnston, what information, maybe more specific to what I just said, would you have?
I think annually we might have 1 to 2 requests on average that emerge. They're often around particular topics. We've definitely needed to navigate over the last probably 5 years, so socio-political conversations around social emotional learning. And so we've really refined our approach to be lesson specific or content specific, not a subject area. So I think there has been some community misunderstanding that you could opt out of an entire subject like health, like social emotional learning, for example. Those are the 2 places that has come up the most often, of which I'm aware.
Right.
There have been requests here or there for a book for a family not to have a child use a particular library book or not this, but they're pretty few and far between.
So thank you. So that kind of leads into my next question, which is if a family or a student is opting out of instruction on a particular book or topic, I would assume that then leads to assessment on that same topic as well. And would the student then be exempt from, for example, a unit, if we're talking about a book, a unit in an English class, or would the teacher have the opportunity to replace that with another novel and ask the student to do, similar activities and assessment with that?
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson. I know you work with this most directly, so please feel free.
Okay, I didn't want to over speak before you had a chance to make sense of it. I think it's a really fair question, and because it doesn't happen that often, it's most often worked out the best in our community here when the building principal and the family come together to talk about their concerns and then to determine a pathway forward. So I'm uncomfortable to say every time we do X, because I think it depends on what it's for. And what the context is, and then we negotiate that. What is not the expectation of the faculty is for them to plan an entire other unit, which is why it's not a unit-based selection. So if it were a text or a book, yes, they would read something else. And if it wasn't essential or core content that was necessary for something, then the student may be able just to opt out and engage in another activity during that time.
Okay.
Did I get your question correct and then answer what you were looking for?
I think so, yes. I also just wanted to make sure that the proposed policy here doesn't substantially change what would be expected of a particular student in a particular leveled class if they decided to opt out.
We're in agreement.
Okay.
Understood. And as Dr. Johnson said, there are opportunities for us to provide alternative activities, but in most cases, in the limited cases where this actually occurs, we're really talking about a lesson. And so typically it's an alternative activity for that assembly or that day or that lesson. And then if it's a skill-based activity, for example, a novel, they can always offer a different work of literature in order to teach comparable skills.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Of course. Mr. Jordan?
Yes, my question is regarding the religious criteria. So I guess my question is there a criteria or review of the religion used to exempt or used for the exemption policy?
No, the term religious alignment is broadly applied.
Okay.
It's embedded deeply, Mr. Jordan, in Commonwealth guidance, given the history of this particular Commonwealth. It applies across the board that there is no questions to justify that, whether we agree with that religious exemption request. Families in Pennsylvania have the option across the Commonwealth to align their religious beliefs with requests without providing any detail or context.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
The other area we see this, you may not see this, but we see this, is in religious opt-outs for the PSSA or the Keystone exam. So we don't judge what is it about that religion that makes that objectionable to the family. We just, if they state that it's a religious objection, we comply.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course. Isabella, I think you had your hand up next, and then Alec.
So I agree that morality is just such a broad concept. Could there be like any language specifically added to narrow that down?
There, in theory, there could be, we can add whatever language we like that's within legal guidelines. Is there something you're thinking of that might help the language in the policy? And I can bring up the policy itself. Right now, the phrasing that we've been provided by the PSBA is religious and/or moral grounds. And so what I was just sharing with Mr. Jordan is we try to use the term religious grounds to be broadly enough where we're not judging what somebody's faith is. And so I think that there's probably some crossover between morality and religion. We just felt the term moral grounds was just so broad that it might allow students to request or parents to request opting out of instruction that really is essential. And because the law doesn't require it, we try not to broaden our policies beyond the legal guidance if we can help it, if that makes sense. But if you can think of a phrase or a concept you're referring to, I'd be happy to, draft that language and see if we could add it in. Give it some thought for a minute. And Alec, what's your question?
So I don't really have a question, but I would just like to give my opinion on the subject. So I think this sort of amendment to the policy is great. I really support the 18-year-old section of it. So like if you're a full-grown adult, you can do as you like when it comes to religious beliefs. I think that's good. And sort of along the lines of what Bella was saying, I think morality is too vague. And I think it would work like with a little bit of clarification, like maybe if it's problematic to one student specifically, or like a collection of students specifically, like one portion, one topic, one activity, and they can make it up some way else. I think it would work great like that.
Thank you, Alec. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see the state provide the option for 18-year-olds to make their own decisions about this. I think it's a terrific transitional piece for you as you're growing into adulthood to be able to make those calls. I will say, philosophically, my hope would be that the vast majority of, which is the case here, that the vast majority of students and families would be open to hearing disparate points of view, and then debate and discuss those and participate in the lesson rather than opting out. The vast majority of our opt-outs, Dr. Johnston, you can confirm for me, are at the elementary and early middle level. We tend not to have as many opt-outs at the high school level because, again, generally we're trying to foster that concept, that mindset that we're open to opposing points of view or different points of view as we get older. But oftentimes what we're finding is that on religious grounds, families are perhaps not as comfortable with some of the subject matter that we provide in health or in social emotional learning when their children are 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. That's really where we tend to see it primarily. Would you agree, Dr. Johnston? Okay. All right. So are you comfortable then with those two key changes, which is 18 and older and religious but not moral grounds? I think that's what I heard from the committee. Dr. Aberle, did you want to?
I just have one last question, just thinking about the 18-year-old and older, especially for some of the students that may be staying on to school till they're like 21, for example. What about if there's like power of attorney over those students that may not make well-informed choices?
It's a great question. Dr. Johnston and I and the members of our special education administration actually discussed this very topic. What about children who might continue to need their parents' support? And our thought is that those students would work through the IEP process.
Okay.
As they're planning on a regular basis, what is the curriculum that may be coming up? And that we would foster that consultation between the parent and the student.
Great. No, that's a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for asking it. All right, so then we'll move this policy. I think this is a one-read policy. We don't consider these to be major changes, so we would put this policy on for January 20th, and then it would go into effect the 21st. Mr. Jordan, did you have another question? I saw your hand go up and then.
Yes, well, I was in line with Dr. Aberle. I guess my question is, how do we incorporate the use of IEP with this policy? Because this policy just says 18 above. That's really all it says. So then I guess the question is that if a person or adult and or person who's over 18 decides to utilize this, how do we use that or interpret that for those students who have a guardian and or power of attorney over them?
Yeah, it's a great question. The conversation that we had, and Dr. Johnson, please feel free to jump in if I missed something, was that because the IEP process is ongoing and the conversations between a case manager and the family and the student are ongoing, that if we had a student, for example, who had an intellectual disability and they were articulating to their teacher that they were uncomfortable in a particular classroom or didn't feel safe or comfortable in a particular space, they could, with their case manager, their classroom teacher, their parent, have a conversation about what's most appropriate. And parents could assist us along with the case manager in helping the student to share their perspective in a way that was developmentally appropriate. And so if that's the case, we're happy to make an adjustment. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. I will, we had considered specific language in the policy, but we just felt that it was too broad. And we wanted to make sure that we kept the individualized educational plan what it is meant to be, which is individualized. So rather than creating a blanket policy that sort of required one process, that we would, through our administrative regulations, have criteria for how we would make those decisions when students are with us, until 21, for example. All right, Isabella, as the meeting progresses, if there's some language that you're thinking of, you could either share it here or you could feel free to email me. Okay, and I want to make sure, because I didn't get a chance earlier, Mr. Brett joined us very early in the meeting. I just wanted to say welcome and hello, and we're happy to have you with us. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Johnston.
I could not get my audio to unclick. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm back again. As many of you know or are aware, we spent a lot of time in the last 2 months talking about field trips of all kinds, shapes, and sizes. And you may be aware that this initially came up with a discussion around what our boundaries are or are not related to the trips we take, extended trips that are taken in the summertime by some of our staff who serve as group leaders and travel to other countries. In the last summer, they were in Europe. This summer, our students and some of the teachers are headed to Japan, for example. And so it was timely in that we needed to review this policy anyway and make some clarifications. And in true transparency, this has been so complicated that up through this week, we made some additional changes in the last 24 hours. So I just was sending a message to Mrs. Scholl that I updated it in the draft policy, which I will show you. And Dr. Yannicone and I had discussed it, but it didn't make its way into the printed form in the same way. It's just in the draft policy section still. And so what I thought was clearest is to talk through the sort of different kinds of field trips and off-campus excursions that we have and sort of what those guidelines are and then some examples. So my hope was to make this a little bit clearer in terms of what we were sharing and updating. And so strictly speaking, field trips and extracurricular trips and school-sponsored trips all have many commonalities. And the one that's the most different is the non-district sponsored extended travel. Each of the field trips, extracurricular trips, or school-sponsored extended travel trips are grounded in activities where our professional educators are overseeing off-campus excursions with their students related to the club activity or curriculum. And so it's connected to core instruction. So whether that's the kindergarten trip that they take, or whether it's the third grade trip, or the 10th graders or 11th graders who head to New York City, whether it's the extracurricular trips that our teams compete in, whether that's the robotics team, our tennis team, whichever's happening, here are guidelines around how those trips can operate and how they should be planned. In this process of working through all of this, we were reminded of other trips and reviewing the trips that we take, that we also have teams that travel to other states or to camps in the summer or in the spring to prepare for an athletic season. And we have a group of thespians at the high school, for example, every summer who go to Indiana for a national and international festival. And then the music team, this is what reminded us this week, put in a request to travel to Nashville next year with the chorus and band students who might be interested in doing that. And so each of those three are run by faculty for the purpose of students in their extracurricular curriculum learning in our school district, going on an excursion outside of our campus boundaries. Does that make sense? And so I tried to give you then examples of what those things all were. Where there has been a little more complication is the non-district sponsored event, where basically we're a conduit of information and resource sharing to allow some of our staff in their own time and on their own time to utilize district resources like email lists or announcements or wall space to have posters to advertise overnight out of state or international travel that's coordinated by a third party. Most often you'll hear about that through like EF Tours or a group called Passports. That's who's coordinating our summer trip this year. And those are coordinated through the vendor. And really the district has no ownership or relationship to the trip itself or the students while they're on the trip. But we are in an attempt to provide equitable access to information, allowing the exchange of information between students, their families, and the group leaders through our school system. And so this just codifies some of the discussion that we have been having about the expectations about how that's done and the ways in which we expect that business to occur. Dr. Yannicone, did I get all the big ideas? Alec, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So, I love this document for one, or this slide here. It's really clarifying, but I think I'd like to know about financial aid. So where does that tie in? So is it like you can get financial aid as long as it's school sponsored, or that's it? Okay, great.
It's a great question. So any field trip, extracurricular trip, or school-sponsored trip, the school district will work to help problem solve finding the finances to ensure that students who would like to participate or the resources that students might need to participate can do so.
But if it's like a trip to Japan, you're not getting financial aid for that, right?
Not through us, but you can work with the group leader to have access, because some of those companies do in fact have access to strategies to do fundraising.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my question was similar to Alex, so it might be helpful, and I'm not sure where this slide is going, but it might be helpful to have, because I think row 1, row 3 have financial support included. It might be helpful to have it that it's not for the bottom one. And then it's unclear with the extracurricular one, especially so thinking about things like the band trip to Hershey. I know that there was a potential to get financial aid for students that wanted to go to that. But now you've just mentioned a band trip to Nashville. That sounds like a whole nother level of involvement. And so where does that fall in the financial assistance and support?
And so it looks like it was an oversight in the evolving content of the slide.
Yeah.
For the extracurricular trip, but the top 3 definitely include opportunities to raise funds and get support from the school district. And that may vary depending on what we're talking about. The band trip to, for example, the band and chorus trip to Nashville, they went to Canada last year. It may not be that the district pays for students to go, but we would help students to fundraise or provide avenues of fundraising to assist with that. There may be additional funds available. We may be able to help. So it's a part of the planning, and the staff members who are sponsoring or planning the trip have to do that in advance, taking a look at what are the resources that may be needed in order for this to be an equitable offering to all kids who are eligible to participate.
And does that include like additional supports, like
it would have to
aids and that type of thing, nursing? Okay.
Yes. Other questions?
Dr. Johnson, would you like me to bring up the actual policy so you can review some of that language?
Sure.
Okay. Excuse me a minute, everybody.
Will you use the one that we have in draft form, not the printed version?
I will.
Thank you.
You got it. I have to come out of here.
Is that the same one? Is that the same one in board docs attached to the agenda, or is it a different one? Okay.
Have to make sure
you know when you think you dot all your I's and you cross all your T's and you've done all the things and made all the changes in all the places, and then you remember when you're sitting in the meeting with your board colleagues and you look and you say, uh-oh, there's one I skipped. This is the one. I don't feel so bad though, because I had already told the superintendent I'd made more changes.
It's a working document right now.
So
right.
I had, and I know this has been a somewhat challenging topic, and I know we need to kind of get this moving and get it back on in front of the board for approval. There was a question I had around the trips that are coming in front of the board. Now, it looks like some of them are going to require approval and some of them are just we would get informed about. I don't think so. Since community-based instruction's been included as a field trip in this policy, I don't remember historically seeing community-based instruction field trips being like the board being informed of those. Is that a change?
Dr. Aberly, sometimes when one reviews a policy, they learn that there's a small word in the policy that perhaps was not always comprehended by the person in charge of the approvals of the field trips. And so, for example, it's possible that the assistant superintendent, that's me, wasn't clear that I needed to be sharing information with the board about the field trips that we're taking. And so Dr. Yannicone and I discussed that as a part of, transparency, like anything else. You miss that one little word and it makes a big difference. I always knew about the big trips needing to be approved if students were going to be off, but letting people know, I think, has been a more informal process. And so we've actually talked about that. One of your sort of the other committees of the board, our academic affairs committee, will get that information, but we will also start to, as you remember from our most recent board meeting, when we're listing trainings and training and conferences, there will be a next motion in academic affairs that tells the board the field trips that are happening, which will include community-based instruction.
And I don't have any specific concerns. It was like, because there's a lot of those that happen and they tend to be bunched together, and some of them are very like, we're going on a trip to a bank, we're going to a pizza shop to order pizza. It's not like, I don't see them as like that. When you think of field trips, people probably don't really think of those as field trips, but if they're looped into here, it'll be, I think, having that table now of like the trainings, if that's appended to that, that'll be super easy to take a look and digest. So yeah, no, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to share it in both avenues, I think, because for academic affairs, it's related to the curriculum and the content and some of the objectives that we have in our equity action plan about diversifying where we go. I don't know how the board can, and again, it was one of those like realizations, like, of course, this makes total sense. Like, I don't have any concern to do it. It just had not happened. And so we're just going to build in those systems and structures going forward. But it'll give us opportunities to have conversation when there's questions, like we do for conferences or hiring decisions that get made when those items get in front of the board, motions get in front of the board. Dr. Yannicone, did I catch that correctly?
Yes, I think, the one thing that's coming to mind in response to your comment, Dr. Aberly, is if a particular trip is embedded within the existing curricular program. So, for example, CPI trips that are recurring, or I wouldn't include those in a field trip list because it's a part of the regular day. no different than I would not include students attending Eastern on a daily basis as a field trip. They're leaving the campus, we're transporting them, it's part of their program. But if it's something that takes us away from the typical standard day, whatever that program is, then I would include it. Similarly, if we had an elective course where students were regularly assigned to Erdenheim to provide support to students, not a field trip, right? It's part of their program.
So maybe the differentiation then is the ones that you have to make the families aware of and that they need to sign for.
Yes, I think that would make sense because that approval is different, right?
Yeah, and that typically requires like maybe there's transport, maybe there's a nurse, maybe there's like, you know, other staff attending.
Yes.
Maybe that's a differentiation, right? Because if they're going to Eastern, they're going to Eastern, right? That's part of their instruction.
Right. It's their regular program.
Yeah.
We have an approval process where staff members who are leaving campus and we need to review the process comes through my office for final approval. We're just going to take it right off that list and put it right on. Much like we don't put in front of the board particular meetings that I go to that does not, or Dr. Yannick, like, or staff members that go to, it's not relevant, right? It's when there's either financial implications because we're getting a substitute, we need a bus, a nurse is needed. So those are the things that I'm going to put in front of the board to align with the policy.
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Dr. Aberley.
So Dr. Johnson, why don't you hit on some of the highlights of these revisions?
Sure. I think we both know I can't read it on there. Give me 1 second to open in my own computer because while I appreciate, I cannot read it on there.
Oh, okay.
Glasses or not, I don't think I'm going to be able to see it. So give me 1 second. I have 2 screens, so I'll look side to side. Of course, it opened the actual policy and not the draft. Be right there. I'm so sorry. That was open.
I have a question on what's like at the bottom of the screen. So the 2 sentences highlighted in green around the board shall approve all extended travel, international trips, coordinated by outside vendors. And if we don't approve them, they can't be promoted inside the district. I guess I have maybe a concern around we're approving a trip that is being hosted by an outside vendor. So maybe it has the image of us endorsing the trip. And so I don't know how that sits.
So I think that's a fair question. And I think we can clarify that, but they cannot, what we have said is, and what we're recommending is that faculty can't advertise a trip of which the board has not approved the advertising.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Maybe that's the clarification. I'm not sure I want to get into like approving a trip that's sponsored by an outside vendor. So if that can be clarified, I think, you know, the advertising piece, I think we've talked at length about at board meeting, academic affairs, but I'm not sure I feel comfortable approving a trip because then it kind of has, you know, it feels like it's being endorsed by the board at that point.
Okay, so I'm going to go in. Better? Okay.
Happy with that.
You got it. That's why we're here.
Thank you. I did try and do my homework ahead of time. So
I can do the edits in real time. Mrs. McGranahan?
Yeah, I had some questions about the trips that are like, for example, I think the one that was listed here is like a baseball team trip over spring break or something like that, you know, to prepare for the season. Yeah. So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but often those trips are organized by the coach and or the booster club. Is that
correct?
Usually accurate? Okay. Yes. And so in those times, we're saying, though, that would fit under the category of there should be an opportunity for kids to have some kind of fundraising if they wanted to, right? And would that be the responsibility of, for example, the booster club, if that's who's putting the trip together, would be to provide that fundraising opportunity? And is that part of their like approval process that we're checking to make sure they're providing ample opportunity for the kids to fundraise?
It would be, I would expect that our teams, if we're going to expect that all members of the team are participating.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, a spring break trip where we're looking at, this is essentially extended preseason,
Right.
into the beginning of the regular season. Yes, if you expect the athletes to travel to South Carolina and stay at a hotel and have meals together, I would, first of all, frankly, I'd want the trip organizers, whether it's the coach and the boosters or just the boosters or just the coaches, I would want them to be working to see how can we minimize costs to the student athletes.
Right.
And so that may be things like meal plans for that, where we're trying to come up with things that are less expensive, like pizza and not an expensive restaurant.
Sure.
Or maybe it's 4 to a room rather than 2 to a room, because that's less expensive for the families. And I would want the athletic department to help to facilitate those conversations so that the activity is accessible. You don't want a student saying, I can't join the baseball team because I can't afford the trip over spring break.
Absolutely.
Right. And by the same token, we do not want trips like this to be a requirement for participation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So if a family says, no, we go away, or we're unavailable, or we don't feel comfortable with our student leaving the state for whatever reason, that's not a condition for making the team.
Right. Right.
There are different summer opportunities where they are completely voluntary.
Right. Right.
There might be conditioning or fitness, but they're optional.
And so, but that category of trip, the students on that trip would still be held to whatever behavioral expectations would be expected within the school day, right? They're sort of any code of conduct or whatever would be extended to on that trip too. Is that
right?
Correct?
So if you, I don't know if you have Board Docs open on your own screen, but as I scroll down, Dr. Johnson has worked to clarify, and I will say, because we've had so much conversation about the field trip policy, there is a lot more specific language in this policy than we typically have.
Right.
As a general rule for everybody on the call, policies are supposed to be brief and broad, and administrative regulations are more specific. But because we've had so many questions, we felt we would get a little bit more into the weeds with this policy language than we have historically done. So you can see here field trip guidelines, and as we've defined the 4 different types of trips. So a regular field trip, right, must have instructional alignment, must have expectations for student conduct. I'm going to just fix a couple of things that I want to fix here.
Yep. Sorry. Yep.
It's okay. It's all right. And access and participation, right? These are part of the curricular program we expect students to be able to attend. And then below that, you have extended travel. And then again, the extended travel may be things like spring break trips, right? Overnight trips of at least one night, could be longer, frequently are longer. And for those, we've added the post-trip review because we want to make sure that we're assessing, is this worthwhile to do again next year? It's not an automatic.
Right.
And then beyond that, you have non-district sponsored trips, which were the impetus for this policy review. And so you can see there how they're advertised, what are the requirements. We are no longer getting involved in conduct expectations, though the vendors and the advisors will have codes of conduct, but they will not be our district code of conduct. And then post-trip review, similarly, because if we're going to continue to endorse or advertise a trip, we want to make sure we thought it was worthwhile and have evidence of that. And so Damien has provided that documentation. And then below that, we haven't really talked at all about medication and health services, but as was alluded to earlier by Dr. Aberle, it is a requirement when there is a trip and a student requires any sort of nursing assistance, that we provide the nurse at the district's expense. That will not be the case for non-school sponsored trips, but it would be the case for the other 3 types of trips. And then you can see there's some additional legal and policy references, because we have some other policies that cross into this, in particular if we're talking about extended or overnight trips. So Isabella, you've had your hand raised for a bit. What question do you have?
So I just felt that the document that shared all the differences between the field trips was very helpful. I feel like it could clear up a lot of confusion. Is it made easily accessible to parents and students, and like by email?
That's a great question. And yes, the spreadsheet that Dr. Johnson shared within the slideshow would be part of our administrative regulations, right? So those are documents that are attached to policies. They are internal documents, but we do use them in like our student handbooks, in our, it could be in the athletic handbook, in the code of conduct, and also in documents that would be sent out to families. So we would, for example, if we were saying this is an extended travel trip, here are the guidelines for this trip, we could certainly attach that spreadsheet. Yeah, and I'm glad to know that it successfully clarifies some of the questions that have existed. The other thing I do want to share, and then I'll move to Dr. Arberly's question, is that we had conversation at length at Academic Affairs in November about the accessibility of these trips for recent graduates, in particular the non-school sponsored trips or the extended travel. And in conversations with our student advisory at the high school, as well as those advisors who have taken these trips before, we feel comfortable allowing graduates in the year in which they graduate. So we're not going to put a 23-year-old on a trip who graduated 3 years ago or 5 years ago. But if a student graduates in 2027, for example, and they graduate in June and a trip is going off a week after they graduate, we would be comfortable, and the policy allows for those students to participate in the trip. And I know we've gotten some feedback for board members when we spoke to student advisory about the field trips. We heard some very strong arguments for allowing graduates, recent graduates, to be able to participate in these trips because they save for it, they consider it an alternative to senior week, and we're happy to have a student choose Europe over the shore. And so we thought it was a better educational opportunity if it's something that they would like to do. And so I know we have it here somewhere, but I wanted to make sure that you know. Here it is. Under number 2, participant and payment requirements, students must be enrolled in the district in the year in which the trip occurs. Requirement effective 2027. So that would allow for graduated seniors to attend a June trip or a July trip, for example, which we had discussed differently at the November meeting, where we were thinking not to allow graduates. Dr. Aberly?
I almost forgot my question then.
I'm sorry.
No, only because, like, you're right, we did discuss this extensively at Academic Affairs. So how comfortable do people feel with students that may be staying in school till 21 to go on these trips then?
Yeah, not a problem, because they're enrolled. Again, they're enrolled in the district in the year in which the trip occurs.
Okay.
So it was less about age and more about proximity to high school.
Okay. All right. And Damien or whoever's editing, I added just another in the chat, those like kind of 3 sentences at the start. I think there's an edit that's needed. So
yeah, I'm going to look at the phrasing of that to make sure it's crystal clear. So
okay.
Dr. Yannicka, you and I can look at that, because obviously there's a couple of typos I need to catch also. So we'll make some final edits prior pending approval to take this policy forward to the board.
Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
So board members, are you comfortable with moving this policy? Now, this I do think would be still one reading, because the substantive changes to the policy itself are actually not that great. I think we could do it in one reading. If you wanted 2 readings, we could do it on January 20th and February, I think it's the 21st, if you would like, and then it would go into effect immediately thereafter. So I could go either way with it being a 1 reading or a 2 reading. It depends on whether you think there might be additional changes between the first and second readings.
I'm a 1 reading guy.
Thank you, Mr. Brett.
Yep.
I mean, I'm fine. I think we've talked about this extensively, especially at academic affairs. So, I think there's been enough opportunities for the administration, the community to weigh into this. So I'm fine with 1 reading.
Yeah, 1 reading is acceptable to me. I don't foresee any substantial changes upcoming.
I agree.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go back to the slides. And we're going to move to 2 less complicated policy revisions, I think.
Dr. Yannicona, just
Yes.
on this slide, I
Yes.
thought about would it be helpful to also include what policies are being followed?
We can certainly do that.
I think
Absolutely.
that might be helpful.
Okay.
Especially for the non-district sponsored.
Yes, we can cite the policies in this spreadsheet, and as not only this primary one, 121, but also the other policies that are referenced within 121.
Yeah, and just I think that the non-district sponsored do not they're covered by whoever the vendor's policies are.
Yes, understood. Okay, all right, I'm going to shift to these 2 policies. So 221 is student dress and grooming, and 325 is staff dress and grooming. In this semester, the Pennsylvania Crown Act amendment was passed, and so all school districts, whether public or private, as well as all places of employment, have until January 24th to enact policy language that is in alignment with the Crown Act. And so the Crown Act amendment clarifies that race includes hair texture and protective hairstyles. And there's some examples there. And religious creed includes associated head coverings and hairstyles. So employers or school districts can only enforce policies impacting protected hairstyles or head coverings if they demonstrate the rule is necessary for health and safety, non-discriminatory, and specifically tailored to the role and applied equally. So we have reviewed our policies. On their face, our policies do not require a revision. However, we felt, given the board's long history of equitable practices, that you may wish to have affirmative language added to the policy. And so I'll share with you what that is. So let me just go into, for example, within the draft policies, go to 221. Okay, I'll share my screen again. All right. So the draft language that we have here is this one sentence under delegation of responsibility. Our district affirms that students may wear hairstyles and head coverings associated with race or religion. No student shall be disciplined or excluded from school activities based on natural hair texture or protective styles in accordance with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act as amended by the Crown Act. And a similar statement is in 325 for staff with one caveat. I'll explain that in a moment. And so what you'll see here is just above that, what is in the current policy, employees shall be groomed so that their hairstyle does not cause a safety or health hazard. So I'll give you two examples we've discussed as an administrative team. The first is food service. So our expectation is that head coverings or hairstyles will not interfere with the requirements under health and safety codes for covering of one's hair when you're preparing or serving food. And so that would be a requirement of the job and is now. And then in addition to that, if a bus driver had a head covering or a hairstyle that impeded their ability to safely view the road in front of them or view their side mirrors, then we would ask them respectfully to adjust that head covering or hairstyle so that they could safely operate the bus. So those are two examples of safety where the district currently provides that guidance to employees. Similarly, if we had a student athlete, say, for example, on the wrestling team, and we were concerned that the student's health or safety were at risk based on long dreadlocks that could be pulled and maybe their neck could be injured, we might provide guidance to them on how we could secure those locks during the wrestling competition and wrestling practices in order to be able to fully participate. But otherwise, the big question is, our attorneys have reviewed the policy with or without this bolded statement. The policy is in alignment with the Crown Act, but we just thought the district might wish to choose to add an affirmative statement. Dr. Aberle?
So I think, especially because it seems like obviously there's been a change that has recently been implemented at the state level, I think a one reading would probably be quite good just for visibility so that everybody understands that we're being compliant. I did have a question, since this talks about grooming, and thinking about like food service workers or people in similar roles, what about facial hair? Does that cover this?
Yes, there are religions where facial hair would be included, yes. And so we may have students, for example, who are of a particular religion that requires some type of facial hair, and we would allow that under a religious policy. I mean, to be frank, we have a pretty broad current policy on dress and grooming.
No, just because it says employees shall be groomed so their hairstyle does not cause a safety or health hazard.
Yes, that is actually what the Crown Act states.
Okay.
And so that's why the language is there. But in practice, to your question, we would absolutely allow that facial hair. I can't think of any guidelines we have. We do require a beard covering
for food
when
service.
Someone is a food service worker. They actually have it sort of goes around their ears and then around the beard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So I agree that I think this could be one reading. We would separately read both the student and the staff policies. And I will say, in public schools, this is less of a factor. I think that there have been a number of court cases related to private schools' dress codes around hair length that have across the country, and that's sort of the impetus of the Crown Act coming into being. Okay, all right, I'm gonna stop share again, just move myself over and go to the last policy. So the last policy is social media. And this policy has come up for review because there have been concerns at the national level and at the state level as a result that in public forums within social media sites monitored or managed by school districts, that there has been censorship of comments underneath a post. So in school districts where they have a public forum. So let's say they have a Facebook page, a school district, and they allow comments, but they censor comments that they consider offensive. There have been court cases where school districts have lost because their choice of what to delete or censor has been considered discriminatory. In Springfield Township, we do not have any public forum for our social media. And frankly, we have very little social media. So we purposely choose not to have a Facebook page, an Instagram page as a district. I have a LinkedIn that I only post as the superintendent of schools. Our HR department has a LinkedIn that is a district social media site. She had it set as a public forum. We have made that a non-public forum. In other words, no comments. And that allows us not to have to regularly monitor some of the divisiveness that has occurred on social media sites and caused challenges for school districts. Within the policy, there are a couple of things that I want to point out. And then I see hands up and I'd be happy to answer those. One thing I wanted you to know is that we are maintaining in the draft policy for your consideration that we would continue to maintain a non-public forum, no comments. And that if families have comments or questions about a particular posting, they would go directly to the administration through email and get their answer that way. The second is that there is specific information, and this is the third bullet here on this slide, and then I'll go into the policy. There has been legal decision-making around school board members' social media postings on their private sites about decisions or issues that are existing in the school district where they reside and where they serve, where they are providing information or context that would suggest that they are acting in that moment as a member of the board and not as a private citizen. So I realize that might sound a little bit vague, but the bottom line is there's been some tightening of the policy language to guide what should and should not be included in the social media postings of school board members. And then finally, we have had discussion at the district level in the administration about student managed or booster managed or home and school managed social media sites that are linked to the district, advertised by the district, linked to our website, for example, so that if you can get to the cheerleading boosters site through our athletic website, then we own what happens there. And so our athletic department is looking at enforcing a non-public forum requirement for those groups if they want to be linked to the district website. If they don't want to be linked to the district website, they can have as much publicity as they like, as much commentary as they want. But if it's linked to the district website, we would ask them to maintain a non-public forum. Okay, Dr. Aberle, I'm going to move to the policy while we're answering these questions. So, Dr. Aberle?
So I have a question because there is still a latent X, formerly known as Twitter site for the school district, because I know because Dr. Hacker used to post on it. It is still there. It doesn't have anything on it, but how do we manage things that, you know, we're kind of like turning over, right? I don't know if it's possible to get it taken down. I don't know, like, what do you do with these things? And that's part of the problem of social media. Once it's out there, it's out there. But that site does still exist. I was like, because I was reading the policy. I was like, I wonder if it's still there. And it is still there.
I would be happy to work to get that taken down.
Okay.
It's not an active policy. We have not had Twitter or X in 4 years.
No.
And so and the reason for that, so everybody knows, is because we looked at the average usage traffic on that site. So we were trying to regularly post, and on average we had 14 people reviewing that every couple of months. And so it's not an effective means of communication, so we took it down.
And I can tell you it has a link to the school district website on it that is active.
Okay, so I appreciate that. We will work to take that down. I'm sure the technology department can help me with that. Or if necessary,
but that's just one. I mean, I only know that because that's where, like, often Dr. Hacker used to post, like, you know, snow days and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But I don't know if there's other examples out there.
To my knowledge, there are an increasing number of booster and home and school social media sites that request linkage to the district website or to newsletters because they want to be able to advertise events and activities that are happening. And we're happy to do that. We just need to reinforce the idea that we, as a district, from a policy and a liability standpoint, need to be very careful about not linking to something that is divisive or creates a liability for the district.
Okay.
Isabella?
So I know that there are several Instagram accounts for maybe like clubs or sports that use our school logo and our school name that say in maybe their bios that they're not directly associated with the district. I'm just curious about our policy regarding like censorship on those, because
It's a great question. So the recommendation from our attorneys who have reviewed this policy, you can see under authority So I talked about non-public forum. You can see that that's checked. But then under authority, it indicates all district-owned social media accounts shall display the official name and seal is what we chose in order to, so we'll use our school seal to say this is ours. And what we would do with any other non-affiliated, unaffiliated group is ask them not to use the seal and to have the statement that this is not affiliated with the district. And there's actually language below, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So there's a little bit more here about non-public forum. And just for your reference, if we had a public forum, you can see all of the things that are X'd out here in pink from 1 to 6. We would have to monitor all of that speech. And we are not interested in doing that, which is why we maintain a non-public forum. That is a 24-hour job for someone. And so we think it's a significant liability for the district. But then if you look down a little further in the policy, there is a section that indicates that, and I'm going to the third-party social media accounts, which Isabella is what you're referring to. So they are suggesting that we require or encourage, we would push hard for this, that they would add the phrase, this is not a district-owned social media account. The district is not responsible for the content or operation of the social media account. So following the passage of this policy revision, we would send this message to all of our third-party social media accounts. And that would be home and school, boosters groups, student clubs and activities, theater groups, music groups. We have a lot of groups that have third-party social media accounts.
Can we not make that a prerequisite of, if you want to advertise, be linked via the school district website, that you would have to have that?
We can certainly, our attorney has recommended this language, which is why you see this little note.
I mean, encourage just sounds like optional.
I understand. We could say third-party social media accounts are encouraged to add this. Those that do not will not be able to link. Like, I can do that if that's something you want to make sure is required in order to be.
I mean, I would support that, but
how do the rest of the board members feel about that? Mrs. McGranahan?
I, as a parent of a child who operates one of those, I would love her to have some guidance and the backing of some guidelines in this what can be very dangerous space of things that get out of control really quickly.
Absolutely.
So I think I would be very supportive of any kind of guidance and or regulation that could be put in place to help those kids, because I think this is it's big.
Yes, that's why it's become an issue. So I'm just drafting this quickly. Third-party social media accounts that do not comply with the request to add the language above or the statement above. Sorry. Will not be permitted to advertise or link to district sites. Sufficient? Anything else in the language you'd like to say?
I think that's good.
Okay. Because we have the right to do that or not, so there's no legal issue there. All right, and then I will share for the school directors, there's a lot of language here because I'll say in the last 18 months, a number of school board directors have been accused of creating a hostile environment for opposing parties or members of their community because of social media postings on their private site. So there's some very specific language here, providing guidance for school directors about how to manage that. And then similarly, there is very specific language for the personal social media accounts of district employees, because as recently as the last few months, there have been situations in school districts across the state where a staff member posts something on their personal social media account that is then broadcast locally, regionally, nationally, that creates a stir. And there have been some cases where it's called for the firing of a staff member because of their, for example, political views. And so there's some guidance here as to what our staff should do to avoid that. There's also some reminders about privacy with relation to their use of student images. And then there's a brief section here about student use of personal social media accounts that indicates, and this is not new, this language is what's currently in the policy. So it basically says that, as we already know, if it violates the code of conduct, if it involves substantial disruption at school, if it could be considered cyberbullying, the district has a responsibility to act.
So, Dr. Yannicone, I have a question around the district employee section. And I know we talked about this when we discussed policy 824 around the difference between a district employee and somebody who may be a student working in the district. So I don't know if we need to look at the language in 824 to make sure it kind of like marries up with what our expectation is around how we're classifying district employees and any extra restraints that they may have, and they may be a student.
Yes. So it depends on, we've referred this to our attorneys. It depends on how they are currently acting. So if they are acting on that social media account in their capacity as a district employee, that is a different level of responsibility versus they're acting in their capacity as a student. So a student who, for example, is a lifeguard at the pool has one level of responsibility, and a student who is moderating the yearbook and is posting for their classmates on a social media site about, hey, hurry up and get your baby pictures in. These are two different levels of requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really just depends on the role they're playing at the time that they are posting.
And is that clear in this policy?
I don't know. I can't say that we looked at it for this specific policy, but yes, 824 was reviewed by an indicator.
Yeah, no, so I know we covered it in 824 because because we also had the statement in there around district students, and we just changed it to made the separation between adults and students.
Yes.
So yes. It might be just good to just check the language in that one as well, just to make sure that we're covering understanding the interpretation of the difference between a district employee or a young person who is employed by the district in whatever capacity.
Yes, understood. There is a definition at the top. I'll double check those.
Because I think in 824 we talked about adult versus student rather than, I think it's less emphasis on the district employee piece because it's that's the acceptable boundaries.
Yes. However, our attorneys did indicate that if a legal minor, somebody under the age of 18, or a current high school student is employed by the district in a particular capacity, such as a lifeguard, they have a responsibility to meet the expectations of that job, independent of whatever their protections are as a student, right? Mrs. McGranahan.
Thanks. I was just curious about the expectation. You said the district's responsibility to intervene when we were talking about the student's social media account. Do we specify in there whether if it's something that occurred like within school hours or outside of school hours? Is that specified?
Not in this policy language, but see the first sentence here, and addressed in accordance with applicable board policies and administrative regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So under 218 student discipline,
mm-hmm.
they have to be in proximity to, they have to be portal to portal, basically. So if
Sure.
something happens on a bus is included, if they're a
Yes,
member of
okay.
a sports team and they're traveling, but all of that is embedded within policy 218.
Great. Thank you very much.
Of course, no problem at all. All right. So with that said, I'm going to go back to slides. And Mr. Wexler, I'm going to ask you to just verify for me. You had indicated at the beginning that there were not any members of the public joining us. I don't see any attendees.
That is correct.
So,
there are no attendees.
thank you. So I'm going to assume we have no public comment. And so the next meeting is February 5th. And I'll just share that slide quickly. Next meeting we have on the books is February 5th at 5 o'clock. And that is also a virtual meeting. And this meeting, and then Alec, I think I see a question, so I'll come right back to you. That next meeting, we'll be talking about extracurricular activities, which is a policy that Dr. Johnson has been working on all semester. So we thought we'd be ready for tonight, and then we thought this meeting was going to run long anyway. So we will work on that this winter and bring that back when we have a little bit more time to discuss. Alec?
So I don't have a question, but I would just like to follow up on the first policy that we started this meeting off with, the language regarding the moral beliefs. I thought
Sure.
of something, and you can make a comment on this as well. I think that if they're part of a specific group with moral guidelines, then that would be fine, like outside of religion. So if I was, let's say I was a vegan and I didn't want to dissect an animal because I'm a vegan, that could work. And it can work for many, like a plethora of other groups as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alec. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me work with Dr. Johnston on how we might phrase that. I think it's a great example. Dr. Aberle?
I just wanted to ask one question and make one comment. So the last policy we discussed about social media, that would be 2 readings, right?
So that would be, again, up to the group based on the changes we've made. Again, I could go either way. The primary reason to go with 2 readings, if it's not a brand new policy, and this is not a new policy, is whether you think there's a chance that there might be changes to the policy between the first and second readings. Okay. Does the board need more time? And if you want to take a little time to think about that, we don't have to make that decision until the new year, because this will be on the January 20th meeting. But I would be comfortable with 1 reading because it's not a new policy. But if you feel you'd like 2 readings as a team, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
I could go either way. So
I know I felt, I feel comfortable either way, but I do think we could probably do it with 1 reading.
Okay.
If we run into difficulties, we can always come back and revise the policy. We have a February 5th policy committee meeting.
Okay.
So so for example, if we have discussion January 20th and members of the full board feel, I'd really like to look at this more closely, or I'd like an executive session to speak with our attorneys about the school board member piece, we can do that. And then we can just bring it back to policy here on the 5th.
Okay.
Okay.
My other comment was, Dr. Johnson, I'm happy to take the minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Aberle. So you'll be the person who presents the report on the 20th. Appreciate it. Isabella?
So just adding on to the first thing that we talked about morality, I loved Alec's suggestion. I thought it was great. I believe that language about maybe if an activity or a lesson would harm students' emotional or mental well-being could maybe be added into that to narrow down the topic of morality.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if we could include that language and even veganism as an example within the administrative regulation. So in the operation of the policy, so we have administrative regulations for every policy. And in that document, for example, this document is in the AR already for exemption from instruction. So what it does is provide guidance to the administration about how to approach that. So maybe we could come up with a list, and you could think even some more about it, what would some of the other conditions be under morality that you would want us to include in an administrative regulation that would be approved? And I think that the examples you're giving are perfectly reasonable examples, and I could see them occurring. I thought I saw another hand. Okay. All right. So this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate all of the participation and engagement. And we will move these policies forward to the board for January 20th. And then we'll be back on February 5th. If for any reason, you know, following this meeting, you have further questions or concerns, don't hesitate to email Dr. Johnson or myself, and we will do our best to get back to you. And if we need to reconvene before the next board meeting, we certainly can do so. But otherwise, I'll plan to bring the language as it reads in the draft policies, and we'll get that cleaned up. And before the end of the week, when the minutes are posted on our website and this recording goes up, we'll also have all of these slides, and then we'll have the finalized versions of those draft policies based on the discussion tonight. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second the motion.
I'm going to say that you're the one making the motion, Mr. Jordan. I'm just a facilitator.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, then I motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
There we go. Thank you.
All right. Sounds like we have everybody in favor. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Thanks so much for all your time. And we'll see you in the new year. We'll see you in 2026.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.